Hey creatives, I'm your host Aylin Wild and this is my podcast Empathy Machine. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today on the podcast, I will be discussing why creativity matters. My best friend, Rachel Malama, has a podcast called Fearless, which I will link in the show notes because she's amazing. And if you need encouragement or you're a Christian and you need some guidance, she is like a walking Bible Wikipedia. Well, she's actually a multi-skilled walking Wikipedia, actually. She's just one of those people that has like a photographic memory, I think. So she just remembers stuff. And I'm like, how in the world do you know that? But anyway, you should definitely check her out. We did a podcast together last year talking about creativity, what inspires us, how we come up with ideas. And one of the things we talked about, which has stuck with me for a while now, was why is creativity important? And I think the reason this has stuck with me is because this is one of those topics that has haunted me throughout the years. You know, you see starving children on the news, you hear about people saving people's lives as doctors or lawyers, and you think, what am I doing about this? And especially as a Christian, you know, we're called to bring light and truth and love into the world. So how does making a video or painting a picture or, you know, taking some photographs make one shred of difference to anyone? Isn't it all just frivolous, indulgent fluff? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to be discussing in today's episode. So stay tuned if that voice sounds like something you've said to yourself before or someone else. I'm going to be sharing some stories from the lives of others and sharing some of my own thoughts. Now, before I go any further, if you'd like to stay updated on this podcast, make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss out on any future content. I share content on videography tips and personal experiences, film discussions, and other creative topics. And without further ado, let's dive into the podcast. So yeah, as I mentioned, my best friend Rachel has a podcast and we did an episode together last year, which was so much fun. We somehow managed to record for like an hour, so she had to cut out quite a bit, but something that I really wanted to share that unfortunately had to be cut out of that podcast just because it was so freaking long. But this is my own podcast, so now I can talk about it and I don't have to cut it out. But I was talking about, because she asked the question, why does creativity matter? And I'd actually, just before recording that podcast, I had been listening to this TED Talk by a woman called Sharmeen Obaid Chinoy. She's from Pakistan. And the TED Talk, which I would definitely recommend you go check out, is called How Film Transforms the Way We See the World. And I'll definitely link it in the show notes as well. It's so inspiring. Basically, at 17, she was an investigative journalist in Pakistan. She named and shamed some very powerful men. They spray painted her house. You know, it was pretty scary. She was doing some dangerous work, but her father actually stood up for her and he said, if you speak the truth, I will stand with you and so will the world. Which I just thought was so beautiful and so powerful that when people stand with us, it empowers us to do amazing things. And she was explaining that Pakistan has very low literacy levels, so film is a really powerful tool for them because they might not be able to read the newspaper, but they can see a film and they can see somebody like someone they know and relate to it that way. So at 21, she became a documentary filmmaker and she was actually filming war zones. Something she said, which I wrote down, was an effective storyteller speaks to our emotions, elicits empathy and compassion, and forces us to look at things differently. In my country, film had the potential to go beyond cinema. It could change lives. And I just think that's so amazing. And as soon as she said that, I just remember being so inspired and I just couldn't wait to hear what she was about to say. So in 2014, she started focusing on honor killings, which I actually have heard about, but apparently we've all heard about it because of this one woman. If you don't know what honor killings are, it's when men kill women who don't obey certain rules. So if they want a divorce, if they marry the wrong person, if they have sex outside of marriage, just a horrible, horrible situation. And she managed to find a young woman who actually survived being shot in the face by her father and uncle because she married the wrong man. And they made a film about her, which was nominated for an Academy Award, and honor killings suddenly became headline news. And the Prime Minister of Pakistan actually hosted the first screening of the film in his office live on national television. and the film won the Academy Award. And in October 2016, the loophole in the law that prevented honor killers going to jail was closed due to people rising up after that film. And now these men receive life imprisonment. So she literally changed her country from a film, which I just think is incredible and so inspiring for me. Another thing she said, which I wrote down, was, for me, cinema can play a very positive role in changing and molding society in a positive direction. And I think that's definitely true. I know for me, I've been inspired so many times by films that have made me want to be a better person, empowered me and inspired me, and helped me to have a lot more respect for people. I recently saw a film, which I will be reviewing in the next podcast, called Misbehavior, which I'm not going to talk about now, but I'll be reviewing it then. But I'm just going to say it was very emotional for me to watch that, because it's not often that I call myself a feminist. I've never really thought of myself that way. But certainly films like that make me so aware of what's come before me, and so full of respect and admiration for people that will stand up to what they know is wrong. I'm literally getting emotional even thinking about it, so I'm going to move on. So back to Charmaine. Many people in the small towns and villages weren't getting the message, obviously, because they weren't getting out of their towns. Most of them hadn't even seen a movie before. So they built a mobile cinema, which was basically a truck with a large screen on it, which would stop in these small towns and villages all over the country. You know, the lengths that she was willing to go to for these people is just so inspiring and amazing. And I know I'm saying inspiring every 2 seconds, and I'm probably going to keep saying it in this podcast, but I think people that use art forms in a creative way to be a blessing to people and to help people is how art should be used, in my opinion. They had to build a cinema inside as well for segregated communities, because in a lot of these villages, women were not allowed to watch the films with men. They had to be separated. So they built basically a cinema inside the truck. And they would teach them about income inequality, the environment, compassion. They showed men films about championing women and repercussions for violence, you know, films about men behind bars. They showed women films educating them about their rights, how to seek refuge for domestic violence, films where women were the heroes, you know, lawyers, doctors, leaders, heads of state. And they're still going about changing the country one village at a time, and they're now moving on to other countries. And even if I just stopped there, I think that's just such an amazing example of how creativity and how art and how film can change the world. And I think it came just at the right time for me, because I was definitely doubting whether my career choice was valid, because, you know, I've always wanted to help people, not make already happy people feel happier. And I always felt like film was seen that way, and I started to view it that way because other people saw it that way, that it was fluff, you know, like it didn't matter and nobody would be helped by it. But I think even films that are not sharing a particularly strong message or helping anybody in a really direct way, I think even just the fact that they're such vehicles, they can be such vehicles for joy and for getting people outside of their own situation. And I think sometimes we need that, and we need that escape. And as long as we're not viewing films to escape every aspect of our lives and we're just using it to help us, I think even films that aren't particularly important in air quotes, are also important. And this isn't on my list, but I just thought of it. I was watching this documentary this other day about, I can't remember his name, but it was on Netflix, and it's called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And there's actually a film that's recently come out. I didn't get to see it, which I'm so annoyed about, and I hope it's still on, but it's called A Lovely Day in the Neighborhood, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, with Tom Hanks in it. And I really, really want to see that, because the documentary made me cry so much. It was so beautiful. And he was talking about how this wasn't film in particular, this was actually TV, but he was talking about how it was such an important tool that could be used for so much good. And he did, you know, educate children about all kinds of issues that they needed help with. And he did that through the vehicle of television. And I think sometimes art can be a vehicle for us to bless people and help people in a way that we wouldn't be able to otherwise, and on a scale that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. He changed the lives of so many children, countless children. And how many people did Charmaine help? Like she helped an entire country of people, and me and other people that saw her TED talk. Like film has a capacity to literally change the world. So when you think about it this way, so I always think many of the world's problems are caused by a lack of empathy. And, by the lack of a childlike state of mind. And sometimes people will only listen and hear something from another's perspective if you package the message properly, which could be through an art piece, a photograph, or a film. And, when you think about it this way, film and art in general is hugely important to society. I was also watching another TED Talk the other day. I've recently been getting into TED Talks. I didn't used to listen to them, but I was listening to another one by Katerina Gregos. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, but hers was on why art is important. And I'm just going to read a little quote from something that she said. She said, "Artistic imagination and creativity are not added bonuses for society. They're not the icing on the cake. They are integral to the human spirit and to human aspirations, an essential part of what makes us human. Art thinks about the world in its current state, and it can reimagine the world as it should be. More importantly, art is the last frontier of unregulated free expression. Art is born of and advocates freedom." I 100% agree with that statement. I've always thought that way, but I've really struggled to express it, and I've really struggled to understand my own thinking, but that definitely sums up my feelings as well. And, just speaking as a Christian as well, for me, like, God is the master creator. We're made in his image, and we're uniquely and wonderfully made as creative beings. We've been specifically designed to function that way. In Exodus 35:35, it says, "He has filled them with skill to do all kinds of work as engravers, designers, embroiders in blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen, and weavers, all of them skilled workers and designers." And here he's referring to the Israelites. And I always look at, traditional, big, grand churches, and I just think they're so creative and they're absolutely spectacular to look at. And it just fills me with awe and hope despite my situation. They're sanctuaries, places of rest, places of peace and beauty. And, I hear people all the time, like, someone the other day said to me that they thought that these big grand churches were absolutely disgraceful, and that, the Catholic Church should be ashamed at these preposterous, elaborate designs. And I just think it's so sad to ever view art that way, to view it as something evil, which I don't think is even possible. I don't think art can be evil. I see them as places of hope and beauty, especially if you have nothing, especially if you're lonely and seeking hope and peace. Just seeing those beautiful designs, stained glass windows and beautiful big ceilings, to me, that inspires me to seek after more. And there's loads of passages in the Bible about design, architecture, fashion, art. Solomon, for example, he was always wearing incredible outfits, and he had this huge palace, and he was incredibly creative, and he championed creative people. As Christians, we're called to bring light and love and hope into the world, be a blessing to people, feed people, clothe people, heal people, love people. But there is something so powerful and hopeful and healing about beautiful art. It pulls people out of their situation and allows them to see life the way it could be. It helps them to pick themselves up and fight for the chance at a good life. I believe we have the power through faith to manifest the life we want to live. And sometimes it takes something like a movie or a painting to give us the vision of that life. I think art is a form of worship. It's one of the purest parts of us as humans, and I believe if we use it for good, we can do tremendous things. I believe art has the power to unite us and bring us closer to each other, despite our differences. There's this show on Netflix called Abstract, which I absolutely love. It is one of my absolute favorite shows. It's absolutely stunning. It always uplifts and inspires me. And there's this episode on a woman called Neri Oxman. She's an Israeli bioarchitect. She was trained as an architect, educated as a medical doctor, and is now a professor at the MIT Media Lab. And this is one of my absolute favorite episodes. I've seen it 3 times now and I've cried every time. It just gets me. I don't know what it is, but there's just something so beautiful about the way she describes art and architecture. Also, I want her hair. I want to be her when I grow up. She's so cool and she's so smart and she has a very pure and innocent mind, which is incredibly inspiring to me. So I'm going to be quoting her a lot in this podcast. I'm just warning you. But basically, she works with sustainable architecture. She talks about designing our way out of the ecological crisis, which I just think is amazing. I am all about that. She works with design, science, and engineering together to create beautiful art pieces in the form of buildings, which are both sustainable and beautiful. She talks a lot about marrying science and creativity together. And, in the MIT lab, they're designing technology for the future. They mix scientists, biologists, computer scientists, graphic designers, biomedical engineers, product designers, neuroscientists, AI specialists, architects, mechanical engineers, and they're all expected to do everything. They have to pick up skills from all different fields. It's truly art and science working together in one space. And there's this great quote that I wrote down that she said, "The choice of font is no less important than the choice of the cell whose genes are being hacked. And in the end, great fonts will help to create great genomes and vice versa." I truly believe in that. And I just think that is such an incredible way to view things. I love that art is just as important as science. The episode goes through her designing the Smithsonian in New York, which is made entirely of natural materials like chitin found in crustaceans, pectin found in lemons, and casein in milk, which can become as hard as concrete. And they show this clip where she's holding this structure, and it's just amazing to think about what it's made of. And her goal is to completely omit the use of plastics in the world, which is not easy, and they go through a lot of experiments to get to that point, and it kind of shows you their process. And she talks about growing the building rather than assembling it. She says technology catches up with the imagination, and therefore imagination has responsibility. And I love that as well. I definitely think that we have a responsibility as creatives to our world. If creativity is a God-given gift, then we have a responsibility to use it for good and to use it to be a blessing to our world and add value to people. The episode also talks about how they unleashed 6,500 silkworms in the lobby. They were placed on a robotically spun fiber silk dome, and basically they were learning to build and manufacture using nature as the inspiration. So like I said, growth as opposed to assembly. And they were basically studying these silkworms and how they moved and how they created as an inspiration for how we could create without harming the environment, because it's not necessary. We really don't have to. We're choosing to do that. And if we think outside the box and if we're creative in our designs and in our science and in our architecture, then we can work in harmony with the environment. Another thing she says is, "I have so many friends who would never go back to childhood. I would in a second. Like now, I'm ready to be 3 again. I remember as a kid growing up, waking up in the middle of a stormy night. I could hear the wind blowing against this very old terrace that I had in my bedroom, and I remember opening it and seeing all this white stuff, and it felt so incredibly magical. And I think that sense of awe and wonder that I had as a 3-year-old that never saw or experienced snow stayed with me, and that innocence is still there." And I really, really love that. I definitely agree that we all need to have a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, a sense of a childlike faith in the way we see the world, a childlike optimism. We need to remember what it was to feel as a child feels in order to think in new and creative ways and, in effect, change the way the world works. I think if more people thought that way and thought like children, I think the world will be a better place. I think there'd be a lot more optimism. I think there'd be a lot more creativity. There'd be a lot less anxiety and fear. because children come from a place of awe and wonder. They don't come from a place of fear or a place of anxiety. And they're always asking the right questions. They're always asking, why can't we do this? Why not? They're not asking, why would we do this? That's a stupid idea. They don't think anything is a stupid idea. Everything to them is valid. So Neri was also a lieutenant in the Israeli army at age 18. She was faced with death at a very early age. She says, I saw everything when I was in the military. Everything. I saw the extremes of the human spirit. Many things I'll never ever share. And that had a great effect on me. And sometimes I think we actually need to get to that place of desperation and the lowest of the human condition to appreciate the things that we have and the things that are free. And art is free. Creativity is free. And you don't need anything to be creative. But it's such a huge blessing. And I think we don't necessarily realize that most of the time. She talks about how Picasso and Einstein were both asking questions about space and time. One expressed himself through painting and sculpture, and the other through mathematical theorem. But both were intensely creative. She then talks about the flow of information across all disciplines, art, science, design, and engineering as a clock, constantly moving from one domain to another. Science converts information into knowledge, engineering converts knowledge into utility, design converts utility into cultural behavior in context, and art takes cultural behavior and questions our perceptions of the world. Where art meets science, it's a space where the changes in our perception, which is art, affect the way we capture data, which is science, and can only happen if you suspend your disbelief. And that's when great things happen. That's when great discoveries happen. That's when we move forward as a human species, is when we're curious and when we're creative and when we ask the right questions. She says you have to be ready for your project to appear in the atrium of modern art and at the same time on the cover of Nature and Science. We don't do either. It's always both. They made the first optically transparent glass printer so that they could create optical lenses and control how solar energy is processed through the skin of a building, so that one day, they could build a glass printed skyscraper. She says design whose purpose is to beautify and prettify the world will not survive. And I think as creatives, we always have to come from a place of adding value. What's going to bless somebody? What's going to add value? What's going to broaden someone's horizons? And if something that we're creating isn't going to be a positive blessing to somebody, that's when we have to question whether it's the right thing to do. They also studied bees so that they could design robots to work together, the robotic queen to tell other robots what to do. And the final quote I'm going to give you that Neri said is, my father said, when you create, you must always feel a little bit uncomfortable. And if you're feeling uncomfortable and alone, you're doing something right. And, creativity takes courage and faith, and you will face opposition, and you will experience doubt. The very beginning of a new creation is laced with doubt, with the words, I wonder. But you have to push through the doubt, because on the other side is freedom, not just for you, but for those who experience your creation. There's tremendous freedom in creation because it in itself is free. You don't need anything to create something. You can draw a picture in the dirt with your finger, or write on a cave wall with a stone. And with that creation, you have the ability to speak to others without the need for language. Creativity unites us, and I think we need more of that in the world, not less. So whenever someone tells you your creative dreams are unimportant, just remember that all good and important things are met with opposition. The enemy will always try and bring down the creatives. There are so many depressed and suicidal artists littering our history. Picasso once said, painting is not made to decorate apartments. It is an offensive and defensive instrument of war against the enemy. The Nazis stole thousands of pieces of art from the Jewish people in World War II to strip them of their culture, identity, and history, and they were irreconcilable. Many of them are still trying to get them back today. There will always be people who criticize you for pursuing art, but please know it is important. It is one of the few things that has the ability to unite us. It has the ability to bring us hope, to heal our minds, to uplift our hearts. And when you really look at it that way, what could be more important? Okay guys, so that's it for today's episode on why creativity matters. Thank you so much for listening. If this episode inspired you at all, please don't forget to leave me a review. That would be really helpful. Also check out the show notes for this episode at ailenwildmedia.com/podcasts. I hope you have a great week and tune in next time for more creative insight into my experiences in the world of video and film.